Okay, so now we're going to take some time to talk about what can go wrong and what happens when things go wrong. And this is the part where I will try to convince you that it is okay that things will go wrong.
Yes.
So, the Infraction Procedure Guide, sometimes called the IPG, is the document that judges use when something goes wrong in an event. It instructs them on how to handle these errors and how to fix them if that's appropriate. While you're more than welcome to review the contents of this document if you'd like, you do not need to know the specifics of it in order to participate in a competitive event. However, there are some helpful information nuggets that I think will improve your tournament experience if you know them ahead of time. So, the infraction procedure guide is designed to generally give the players the benefit of the doubt, especially at competitive rules enforcement level, right? The penalties for infractions generally scale with the infraction severity, with most infractions just giving a player a warning the first time or two they commit it, assuming they're accidental. Philosophically, the Magic Tournament rules and infraction procedure guide are written in such a way to prevent rules lawyers from using tournament procedures to win games. Generally, we want Magic tournaments to be decided or to be Magic tournaments are designed to test players' knowledge and skill with Magic's game rules, not its tournament structure. Okay? So if you suspect that your opponent is trying to leverage tournament structure to cause you to lose a game, you are welcome to cause a judge. Like if they're trying to rush you through your plays or cause you to miss triggers, call a judge and the judge can help you get them to calm down. Okay. Now, players are expected to work together to keep the game state legal. If a player notices an error has occurred, they are expected to pause the game and call for a judge, regardless of which player actually made the error. And in fact, calling a judge when you have made an error is a great way to rule out cheating as a possible cause for that infraction, right? Because if you're trying to cheat, you obviously wouldn't rat yourself out. Even spectators are empowered by tournament procedure to ask players to pause a game in progress so a judge can be called to address an error in the game that they were spectating.
And now this is true for regular as well as for competitive, y'all. So I don't know if any of y'all know this, but if you are walking by a game, even if it's at FNM and you see something is wrong, if there's a tournament official there, or even like if like there's a lot of times like the store owner or the store employee or whatever will be the person in charge, you can say, "Hey guys, I noticed something is wrong. Can we pause the game here? I'm going to call the judge." You can do that. You can ask the players to stop. Now, I wouldn't recommend. In fact, I would actively say you should not say anything about what went wrong. You shouldn't say like hey, you shouldn't try to fix it yourself. You should just say, hey, can you please pause? And I'm going to go get somebody to help us fix this. But you're allowed to do that at regular, but it is even more important for that to happen at competitive because we want to make sure that games are above board, so to speak. We want to
Yep.
make sure that everything is as it should be.
Right. And so when you call a judge for an error and after you've explained to the judge what has happened, the judge should communicate three pieces of information to you. Those are the infraction, the penalty, and the fix.
Yes.
So the infraction is simply just a description of what went wrong, and we'll in the next slide we'll talk about what some of those infractions are called and kind of what they mean. But basically, should explain to you specifically which gameplay error or a tournament error occurred. Then they'll talk about the penalty, and the penalty is the consequence for that infraction. It could be a warning, a game loss, a match loss, or even disqualification, though disqualifications are incredibly rare.
And only for like the most egregious things.
Right, exactly. And then the fix is a series of actions that the judge will walk the players through in order to correct the erroneous game state and return it to a legal game state. Now, a judge may opt not to enact a fix if the prescribed fix is deemed to be too disruptive to the game state. This is usually because too much time has passed between when the error occurred and where we are now in the game. So the sooner you can catch an error and get a judge to your table, the more likely it is that the judge will be able to fix the problem for you rather than just having to kind of say, well, we can't back up a couple turns to fix this error. So you're just going to have to play from the game state as it exists now. So, what can go wrong? Assuming you're acting in good faith, i.e., you're not intentionally breaking rules or being a bully, there are generally two broad categories of what could go wrong: gameplay errors and tournament errors. Now, so a gameplay error occurs when someone violates Magic's comprehensive rules. Examples might include missing a trigger, looking at cards you're not entitled to see, errors while making an error while taking a mulligan, or other violations of Magic's comprehensive rules. By default, essentially all gameplay errors come with a warning, with with a couple exceptions we'll discuss later. On the other hand, tournament errors occur when someone violates Magic's tournament rules document. Examples of this include, and are not limited to, being late for your match, soliciting advice from spectators, playing too slowly, and not sufficiently randomizing your deck. Now, most tournament errors come with a warning, the exceptions being uh, tardiness and decklist problem, which usually come with a game loss, and outside assistance, which comes with a match loss. Now, I want to do a quick note on tardiness because this is one of the most flexible versions or the most flexible errors in terms of
Yeah.
what penalty is actually assessed. So for tardiness, it's generally assumed that if you are not seated at your table when the tournament officials tell you to begin the round, you are late and you likely will get a game loss. If you show up within the first minute of when the the round has started, you will usually only be given a warning and asked to just be there, there on time next time. But anytime after a minute, you're likely getting a game loss, right? And that's just fair. You've held up the tournament, so giving you a game loss means you're only going to probably only play 2 games, and you're more likely to finish your match on time.
Yeah.
If you are 10 minutes later or 10 minutes late or longer, you will be given a match loss and automatically dropped from the event.
Unless you talk to a judge.
Yes, you can. If something happens and you have to walk away from the event and you're more than 10 minutes late, you've been awarded a match loss, you can talk to a judge if you want to continue playing in the event, and they can undrop you from the event
Yeah.
as long as you do so before the next round starts.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So like sometimes there's like if you like an emergency happens, right? And or like or a friend needs your help or you know there's a family phone call that you suddenly need to make and you're I mean obviously that takes precedence over a magic
Mm.
tournament, right? And so but if you are more than 10 minutes late, you will get that match loss, but then you can talk to the judge and be like, "Hey, can we undrop me? I would still very much like to continue playing in this event. I've
Yep.
taken care of what I need to take care of." So, yeah, you can do that.
Okay. So, um, I want to talk about warnings, right? By far, the most common penalty you'll experience is a warning. And getting penalized for something can be demoralizing, especially if you're still new to competitive rules enforcement level events. So I want to talk about what this actually means. Okay. Warnings exist for 2 reasons. First, having some kind of penalty helps reinforce the kinds of play patterns we want to see in tournament settings, right? A judge saying, I'm giving you a warning for doing this thing, be better next time, can help reinforce and help you remember that this is a thing you're supposed to be careful about while you're playing events. But second, warnings allow judges to track patterns of behavior with players. Okay, so we'll let's talk about what that means. So if you get a warning for something, don't worry about it. Right, a single warning will not have a meaningful impact on your tournament experience.
I was so petrified whenever I got my first warning. I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh no," because I didn't know what it meant. But yeah, so like understanding that it really is not that big of a deal is
Hmm.
like huge. At least it was huge for me.
Yeah. The only time when you will start to, I guess, where your tournament experience will change is when you get the same kind of error multiple times, right? So let's I'm going to go back to this slide here so we can look at these things. So for gameplay errors, most gameplay errors won't get upgraded from a warning to something else, normally a game loss, until you've made that same kind of error 3 times, right? So for example, if we look at mulligan error, right? If you the first 2 times you make some kind of mistake while you're mulliganing, it will just be a warning. It won't happen. You won't start to get actually penalized for it in a meaningful way until the third time it happens. And how likely are you to make 3 mulligan errors in a tournament, especially if you've already been talked to about it twice?
Right. Not super likely. And then also, but this is where the tracking player behavior thing can come in too.
Mm,
So if you are doing that multiple times, it's like, okay, is this player actively cheating now? Like that's how the judges can
yeah,
help, or that's what can help the judges kind of ascertain, um, you know, if somebody is trying to gain an advantage or not. So,
yeah.
um,
And
yeah,
and with these upgrades too, it's like if you get a warning for a game rule violation and a warning for looking at extra cards, then if you make a mulligan error, you're not gonna that's not getting upgraded to a game loss, right? It needs to be the same kind of gameplay error.
right, exactly. So like, um, it has to be. So it's yeah. It's like missed triggers or mulligan errors or game roll. You know, like yeah, you have to. It has to be the same one 3 times. And
Yep.
so
And tournament errors, with the exceptions of the ones we've already discussed, tournament errors function much the same way, except that they're upgraded. The penalty is upgraded after on your second time getting that error. So like if you are playing slowly at some point during the tournament, you're taking too long to make decisions, and it's causing you're slowing the tournament down, and a judge issues you a warning for slow play. The next time you get hit with a slow play infraction, it will likely get upgraded to a game loss. So just after the first time it happens, make sure you're on top of it. But if it only happens once, it's not gonna, it's not the end of the world.
Nujima, thank you so much for the follow. It's great to see you. We're doing that. We're teaching people about demystifying. We're demystifying competitive rules enforcement for people. So I know that for me, whenever I was getting started playing competitive Magic, not knowing the difference between regular rules enforcement layer like FNM and what I can expect going into a competitive event was a little bit of a roadblock for me. And so we're trying to kind of break down that barrier this time around. You'll find here on this channel we play a lot of limited. So yeah, well that's usually what we do here. But today's a special event. Today's a special event. So thanks for being here. All right, Brad. Sorry about that.
Okay, so I mentioned that there were some exceptions to the penalties we discussed on the previous slide. The first exception is for missed triggers. Now, there is a lot of confusion surrounding missed triggers, largely because how they're handled in casual play groups and at regular rules enforcement level differs a lot from how they're handled at competitive rules enforcement level. Okay. So a trigger is only considered missed if you don't demonstrate awareness of the trigger before it would have a visible impact on the game. Now, you can read about it in the IPG if you want to know the specifics, but for now, just know that if you think you've missed a trigger, call a judge and ask. You might not have actually missed the trigger simply by not calling it out when the ability was supposed to trigger. As an example, the example of this that blew my mind the first time I read about it was with prowess, right? So prowess is an ability when you cast it on creature spell, the creature with prowess gets +1/+1 until end of the turn. If you have a like a monastery swift spear and you cast it on creature spell and that triggers prowess, you have not missed the trigger until some event in the game cares about monastery swift spear's power or toughness, right? So like if you have monastery swift spear, you cast it on creature spell, you attack with monastery swift spear, right? You have not been considered to have missed that trigger unless you tell your opponent that they're only taking 1 damage when you deal combat damage, right? If you tell your opponent when it's time to deal combat damage, my creature's dealing 2 damage to you, that's the first time that prowess trigger has visibly affected the game state. And that's the point where you would have missed the trigger if you don't say something about it,
Hmm.
right? So please feel free to look at the IPG if you want to see just to get more information about what that means. It lists out different kinds of triggered abilities and when you're supposed to call them out. Um, but just know that you can, if you think you've missed a trigger, feel free to call a judge and they
They'll
can
let you
clear it
know
up for
whether or
you.
not you missed it. Yeah,
Yeah.
like you don't need to read the IPG for this. Yeah, you can just
Yes.
ask.
Now, because triggered abilities are so common and missing them generally is bad for you, there is no penalty for missing a trigger. The exception to this rule is for triggers that are considered generally detrimental. So, like if you had a triggered ability that dealt damage to you when you performed a specific game action, that would be considered a detrimental trigger, and missing it would come with a warning. Um, but if it's a trigger that's generally beneficial for you or detrimental to your opponent, um, you're not going to get penalized for missing it. You just probably won't. If you miss the trigger, you probably won't get to resolve it.
Yeah.
Additionally, you are not responsible for calling out your opponent's missed triggers. right? We talked about how players are expected to maintain the game state together. Mis triggered abilities, your opponent's triggered abilities are the exception to that. Now you can, if you want to, point out your opponent's missed triggers, but you're not required to. On that topic, there is another infraction in the gameplay errors section called failure to maintain game state. This infraction exists to reinforce the idea that both players in the game are responsible for keeping the game state legal. So you can be given this infraction when your opponent makes a gameplay error and you don't immediately catch it. However, because this infraction is based on something that your opponent is doing, this infraction comes with a warning, but will never be upgraded to anything beyond that. Like it would feel so bad to get a game loss because your opponent made a mistake. So this just exists to help you or to reinforce to you that players are supposed to be keeping the game state legal together.